Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Voluntary Initiative annual stakeholder group meeting for today on 8th of December. It seems quite a long time ago that last year's meeting back in November, time seems to have flown by and lots of things have happened, including myself turning from a presenter of that meeting into the chair of the Voluntary Initiative. So be careful if you're presenting at this meeting where you might end up. So I'd just like to welcome everybody from all the organisations that have joined us and all those that are going to speak later on. There are a few apologies that we've got at the moment. There's Bill Parker from AHDB, Ruth Bailey and Ian Foreman from AEA and National Sprayer Testing, Lisa Fielding from Welsh Government, Patricia Irwin from the Ulster Farmers Union, John West from Rothamsted, and Neil Evans, who would usually be here, but he has a family funeral. Neil, very instrumental in our activities at the Voluntary Initiative. So we've got a packed agenda today, so I'm going to press on and move into a presentation in a little while. But I just wanted to make sure you should all have had a copy of last year's minutes. I don't think there was any actions out of that minutes, but if there is anybody who wants to raise a point, and then please either do so in the chat room, or if it's one of the panelists on the panelist section, if you'd like to say anything, then please do. If not, I'll accept them as a true record of what happened this time last year. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we've got the minister joining us at about 2 o'clock, so I'm going to give the chairman's introduction and a VI report, some of which Neil would have done. So I'm hoping that if I share my screen with you, then you should be able to, he said famously, I think it's not. I'm hoping, Jenny, that that's come up.
Yes, it has, Phil.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So welcome to the VI report for December 2021. And the first thing I'm going to do is to give you some Naroso update about the, currently there's 20,191 active members. And if you look at the graph here that I'm showing, you'll see that the blue lines from the blue bars are from 2019, and the red color 2020 and the green in 2021. There is fewer members. There's a couple of reasons for that. Probably there's probably one or two people who are still caught up in COVID and points and renewing. But I think going forward, I think what we'll find is that actually some sprayers are getting bigger, and that will be shown in some figures I'm going to show later on. If you look at the members by country, unsurprisingly, majority in the United Kingdom, but also a fair spread in some of the other devolved administrations, and so well supported throughout the areas around the United Kingdom. As I mentioned, there have been COVID challenges, but there have been some improvements made with the addition of email addresses, which have seen the online portal being able to take payments, to upload and gain CPD points, online courses, manage membership, and the introduction recently of digital certificates. And that last count of those, I think there was over 3,000 to 4,000 of those had been downloaded. And of course, the face-to-face annual training events for 2021-22 have just been launched, and they will be ongoing for the next well, until May, June of next year. So that gives you a bit of an update on the National Register of Spray Operators. If we look now at sprayer testing and some of the figures for the number of sprayers that have been tested over the last 12 months, and the figures for 2015 through to 2021 are there. So in the region of 15 or 16,000 sprayers. The red bars on the top of 2019 and 20 were the December figures that for some reason were, I think the graph was put together in November, so those were projected figures for those 2 months. But finally up to now, in 2021 up till now, it's just over 15,000. When we look at the spread of sprayer tests as well, you can see once again predominantly in England, but still sprayers being tested in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And the sectors in which sprayers are being tested, unsurprisingly, agriculture with most of them, but both in amenity, horticulture, and in the fruit sector as well. So you'll see there in the 3 years, and numbers are relatively stable, although the reduction in agriculture is probably going to be explained by the next slide I'm going to put up, which is about how sprayers are slightly getting bigger. So we can see that if you look at the number of 12 meter, 18 meter, and 20 to 24 meter sprayers are declining in size, and if you look at the 2020 green bar there, for the 28 meter, 30, 32, and particularly 36 meter sprayers, there tends to be an increase in boom size. So that would indicate that sprayers are getting bigger, probably covering more acres, which probably means as well that we've got fewer sprayer operators operating them. So we're picking that trend up in the figures. We've also got an increase in tank capacity as well. So you'll see that from the blue lines in 2013, and if we look at the 4,000 on the far right hand, the 4,000 litre plus sprayers in 2020 are much more, which would indicate wider booms, bigger tank capacity, probably less sprayers being tested, and possibly that's one of the reasons for a small reduction in spray operators as well. So I will try and answer any questions at the end of this on that, but if anybody has got any questions on the Neroso figures, then I'm more than happy to take them into consideration. Just a quick word about IPM. I'm not going to dwell too much on this because we've got Henry and Chris speaking later on about IPM, but lots of engagement around IPM plans, IPM going future. We'll possibly hear about what the role for IPM is going forward, and these new IPM plans with some of Henry and his colleagues' work around measuring the unmeasurable will come up later on. But just to give some figures on IPM plans, and we've also had the interruption with COVID. We've also had a new plan on board. So you'll see in 2021 there are some new IPM plans, about 4,000 of those added still to some of the old plans. So we're roughly on course for those. There's another few weeks to go. So we should be round about the same number as in 2020. Some of the work we've done through the year, half a dozen webinars on water, wildlife, very much a focus on water protection, oilseed rape herbicides, and it will be continuing working with water companies, working with operators, working with farmers to try and make sure we have as little impact as we can on our water. We will be having further webinars into the new year on biostimulants, biopesticides, what the world of IPM might look like, and what the sustainable farming incentive might mean for future best practice. And those campaigns have been around oilseed rape, they've been around Bee Connected, so pollinators as well. And Bee Connected, whilst it's not perfect, we still could see some work moving forward in trying to engage much more with pollinators and much more protection of our natural habitats and semi-natural habitats. But these have very much been campaigns that we've run in both the knowledge trails with city and guilds and basis. My next point would be around VI champions, and welcome. I see there's a number of them on there, and if I didn't say welcome to you as well, you are really instrumental in helping us deliver that forward messaging from forward-thinking farmers. It's great to see you at Cereals, at Crop Tech, and I know a number of you will be helping Neil and the Voluntary Initiative at Llama in 2022 in January. So thank you very much for the champions. We've picked up another 15 champions this year, and it really is important for us delivering that message into the industry. So as I just come to begin to sum up now, I just want to give you a snapshot of what the the VI has been up to. So very instrumental around Neroso, sprayer testing and IPM plans, very crucial. Our strategy has been delivering a number of areas around integrated pest management. We're looking after groundwater, soil, looking after wildlife, training education, not only now and what we've got, but the new metrics and science and evidence based around what the future of a sustainable farming model might look like, and the responsible use of plant protection products. There's always some VI asks of government, and I must say that we've engaged in the 9 months I've been in the job. I think we've had 3 ministerial meetings, including today. We'll have had at least half a dozen meetings with the DEFRA pesticide team, and that has been a really constructive. But if we look at, we've already mentioned about COVID. We've also mentioned about our messaging and the new plans that we're going to talk about later on. We've talked about the water group working with water and webinars targeting there. We've had other webinars that have been focusing on wildlife, with the use of our sponsors helping us out in those webinars, and our VI champions at cereals and crop tech. We've been continually trying to regularly dialogue with city and guilds, with LEAF, with BASIS, with AHDB about what our offer looks like going forward. And certainly when we have a discussion about National Action Plan going forward, the work we're doing with the NFU and Scottish colleges around new metrics, new plans, we'll be able to mould them all together into training, knowledge exchange and accreditation for the industry going forward. And of course, everything needs to have a basis of science, and it would be fair to say that I've chaired 2 of the pesticide forum meetings, and it would be interesting to see how that goes off into the future. And of course, I've already mentioned about engagement with ministers. So my final 2 slides really are to say that the VI is really important. The facilitation across the industry, across the sectors, bringing a number of organizations together to talk about responsible use, best practice for plant protection products in modern sustainable farming systems. And if you want to see any more information on the voluntary initiative, we have a brand new website that's just up and running this last few weeks, with advice on water, advice on publications, advice on things like pollinators as well. So I'm conscious of time, and that was a whistle-stop tour through the activities of the VI. I'm sure we can engage in some more questions later on as we cover some of those subjects. So I'm going to stop sharing now and hopefully return to the screen. Right. Questions. I'm going to move swiftly on as I'm trying to keep the agenda timings, which is just about going all right at the moment. Alister, I'm going to hand over to you. I think I've seen you somewhere.
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Excellent. We can indeed. So that the floor is yours.
Right, I'm just sharing my screen. So hopefully, can you see my screen okay?
We can indeed.
Fantastic. Well, yeah, thanks, Phil. Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alister Leggatt. I am a catchment manager at Affinity Water, but I also wear multiple hats, and I actually represent a network of catchment managers across the UK water industry under the Water UK banner. And as part of our partnership with the Voluntary Initiative, we routinely attend meetings and provide updates on what we've seen in terms of pesticides at the water treatment works, and just to really kind of set the issue as a receptor for what issues are created by pesticides that escape into the environment. So I'm going to give a bit of an overview of what we've seen in the past 12 months. So I'm not going to dwell on this slide because I've got quite a lot to get through, but I wanted to really just highlight that, you know, with climate change, with the more extreme weather patterns, prevalence of much higher intensity rainfall. I mean, this is presenting challenges for UK farming as well as the UK water industry in terms of the issues that are created by the changing climate. And this year has been, you know, not much difference. And I wanted to kind of remind myself what an average year actually looked like in terms of weather, and I don't think there really is one anymore. And each of the seasons that we've been through in the past 12 months have presented different challenges, and those challenges have reflected in the pesticide detections that water companies have seen at either their river or their reservoir abstractions. So I won't go into any more detail on that. I think we're all aware of the challenges that this has faced in, you know, both nationally and regionally, but I wanted to set that context for particularly for the next slide. So for those of you who do regularly attend the various, you know, water group, other strategy meetings, etc., you'll be familiar with this particular type of slide. But so this bar chart represents data that's been provided by water companies voluntarily on a quarterly basis through to myself and my colleague Richard Reynolds at Anglian, and we collate that data and then present it to kind of highlight the key actives and issues that we're seeing across the UK, and this data is provided voluntarily, is provided by, you know, all corners of the UK. So Northern Ireland, Welsh Water, Scottish Water also regularly provide data in addition to the English water companies. So this is a collation of that over the past 12 months, and you can see across the legend at the bottom we've got the main actives that the water companies detect. In brackets are the number of detections that have been above the drinking water standard, and this is for raw water, and that's important to note. This is not final drinking water, so obviously we do have treatment that can cope with most pesticide issues up to certain concentrations. But some of the main kind of headlines that we've seen here, so you can see there are, I think, about 12 different actives that are regularly detected by water companies throughout the year. Between 13 and 15 water companies have provided that data voluntarily, which we've been doing this for a number of years now, and that's the best return we've had on average, and just shows how the willingness of water companies to put this data out there and help, you know, with the discussions and help shape how we can actually tackle some of these issues. I mean, in total, we've seen, you know, over 1,300 exceedances in raw water for these particular pesticides. It's important to know about 43% of those total exceedances throughout the year were glyphosate. Obviously, that is a range of sectors, not just agriculture, but we do want to, you know, highlight that just the number of detections we've seen, and that will obviously present challenges going forward, which I think the sector does need to look at. In addition, in the last 12 months, we have seen notable increases in detections of 2,4-D throughout the year, but particularly during the spring and summer months. Bentazone has also increased significantly, and the detections we have here are for surface water. Obviously, there's also an issue with groundwater, and particularly groundwater. There's more challenges around treatability of the water, but we have seen detections there increase. Propyzamide is a big challenge for us, but I'll go into a bit more detail on that shortly. And flufenicet has been one that has been emerging. We've seen a greater increase in detections over the last couple of years. So you can see from the bar chart, so we've got the number of exceedances, but the bar chart shows the maximum individual concentration that's been detected, and the drinking water standard is 0.1 micrograms per litre. And as you can see, some of the maximum detections we've seen, as an example of propyzamide, has been over 170 times the drinking water standard. Now, as I'm sure you can appreciate, that can pose significant challenges for water companies to the extent of needing to shut down abstractions and move water from elsewhere. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail. So the next few slides, I've just got a kind of few case studies from the seasons over the past 12 months, and just how they've kind of been addressed through discussions with the VI. So propyzamide, as I've already mentioned, a big challenge, and I'm going to highlight a particular case study here that was provided by Anglian Water from their Graffham reservoir, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And Graffham can supply over 1 million direct customers, but also also a number of water companies, including Affinity, actually take imports from that. So the reach of Grapham extends well beyond the million direct customers. Now, in this particular scenario, earlier on in the year, concentrations, particularly in the River Great Ouse, started to increase dramatically, to the extent of concentrations over 4 micrograms per litre, which is a significant concern, because if you let that contamination into the reservoir, it can persist for a very long time. So at that period, Anglian Water had very few choices. They either stop pumping from into the reservoir itself and have a risk if there is a drought period during the spring, that not having enough water in the reservoir to supply water during the summer period, or they take the risk and pump that water in, and then look at the long-term contamination that can potentially impact many properties. Fortunately, that didn't manifest into a significant issue, but it was a real knife-edge problem there, and that was exacerbated by the demand challenge caused by COVID-19, where consumption across the UK has increased significantly as a result. So just a bit more of a summary around propyzamide. Yeah, throughout the year, 2/3 of companies in the UK detected propyzamide above the drinking water standard, and 10% of all the samples that were taken as well were exceeding the drinking water standard, particularly during the period of September to April 21. But this presenting this data through the VI has really been beneficial this year. I mean, I've just highlighted a few of the kind of actions and discussions that have resulted through the discussions, and there has been significant improvement in communication for the water companies with manufacturers and producers. Water companies have had active engagement with Corteva, and an Affinity example that's led to a number of trials that we're running alongside Corteva to look at ways of mitigating propyzamide losses to water. I know Phil's already mentioned about the VI webinars, but yeah, there's been several this year that are focused around the water issue and propyzamide, which have been, hugely beneficial in kind of furthering the discussion, raising the profile of the issue. I mean, there has been a lot of kind of press coverage around the good practice stewardship, and it's been really good to see that kind of information getting out there. There's been influencing and training around kind of BASIS and Noroso. Noroso have a specific case study around propyzamide now. There are discussions in the new year with BASIS around a specific water module, which is a real positive step in the right direction. And we also have the OSR Herbicides Think Water campaign, which I mean has been going for a few years now, but I think is in a bit of a need of review. And I know there's been discussions around that, so we'll very much welcome that in the UK water companies. So just looking to spring and summer challenges, I mentioned around the increase in 2,4-D detections. We've also seen a similar increase with MCPA, and I've already mentioned around glyphosate. I just wanted to show this to show the differences between the number of detections and the maximum concentrations that we saw in 2020 versus 2021. And as you can see, particularly with 2,4-D, there's been a significant increase. I do want to caveat that during 2020, there were some reductions in sampling for some water companies due to the pandemic, but we have had a look, and the numbers are reasonably representative. So I don't think that necessarily clouds that there has been an increasing issue, and we have been seeing 2,4-D exceedances increasing year on year. MCPA, although a number of water companies do see a challenge with MCPA, but this is particularly an issue in Northern Ireland linked to rush control. And there's been some really positive discussions through the HSE Pesticide Forum Grassland and Forage Herbicides Working Group. And I think those discussions will be continuing to see how we can address some of the challenges around these herbicides. And just for the final season around autumn, and now with metaldehyde, I'm sure many of you are aware, metaldehyde has been a big challenge for UK water companies for the past decade or so, primarily because it can't be removed with conventional treatment processes. Obviously, most of you will be aware that the withdrawal for outdoor use comes into effect at the end of March next year. And but following the announcement of the withdrawal back in 2020, many water companies have been seeing a declining trend in metaldehyde, but that's actually now gone up due to probably, use up of existing stock. And we did raise that through the VI. And as a result of that, the MSG guidance and comms did resume for this season. There's been some really positive coverage in the arable press, and I've got the example from the Farmers Weekly there. We also very much thank the AIC for continued support with agronomist updates, which go out to water companies and support extraction management activities and really help water companies prevent their reservoirs and intakes being contaminated with metaldehyde. And this has been a really positive example of industry collaborative working. Now, I'm conscious of time, so just for my final slide, just highlighted a few key messages from the UK water companies, and obviously reflecting that it has been a challenging year for us as a receptor of pesticides that escape into the water environment. Water companies are, not just sitting on our hands. We are investing significant amounts of money in catchment-based schemes. Most water companies have a dedicated catchment management team and are spending millions of pounds to try and find catchment-based solutions to these issues. I've already mentioned that climate change is set to exacerbate these challenges further. So, we welcome, the opportunity to engage with such a wide range of stakeholders through the VI. And as a consequence, Water UK are very active members and participants of the voluntary initiative, and will continue to do so because it provides that platform to highlight the issues that we're seeing and work to find, solutions that can, benefit ourselves and more resilient and sustainable agriculture. The increased promotion and awareness, we hope that really continues, and we've seen some really positive steps in the past 12 months, which we really welcome and continue to build on. And really working together across sectors is key to this, particularly in driving forward IPM, which has already been mentioned. And I won't dwell on the other future opportunities that can also include protection of water. Many of those will also be mentioned in the previous discussions. So that's everything from me. Thank you for the time, and obviously if there are any questions, happy to take them.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed, Alister. Yeah, if you stop sharing your screen now, that'd be great. And I can, you're taking up the whole of my screen now, your presentation. I can't, yeah, no. So I think the first thing I'd say is, yes, I agree. We can talk to Neil about a review of oilseed rape herbicides, the oilseed rape herbicide campaign. I think there's also a case probably for doing some more localized grassland campaigns in the areas that are using grassland herbicides as well. So there's certainly something that we can take offline, Alister, and discuss there. But thank you very much. Any other questions for Alister before we move on? No. Okay. Thanks very much indeed, Alister. I know you've got to move off shortly, but thanks very much for giving us that update and that report. We'll continue to work with water companies and our water plan into the future as well. So thank you. Okay, we're going to move on now to IPM, and thanks, Alister. Yeah, no, we're going to move on to IPM, and I've got Henry here and I've got Chris Hartfield. Good to see you again, Henry, and I'm going to hand the floor over to yourself.
Brilliant. Can you all see and hear me and see the slides?
We can indeed.
Perfect. So today, Chris and I are going to talk about how future schemes could encourage and support IPM uptake. IPM is a holistic approach to pest management, which aims to maximise profitability and productivity whilst minimising the negative impacts of production on the environment. So the goal is environmental and economic sustainability. When looking at the process of IPM, this is what we'd encourage growers and their advisors to sort of think about when they're going through and planning for IPM and for its implementation. So we'll start with preventative measures to firstly prevent the introduction of pests onto farm and to minimise their spread if they are on farm. And then the next stage would be sort of detection, so firstly diagnosing which pests you've got, monitoring levels, utilising action thresholds when necessary. When it comes to the intervention, there have been many options here. They may be mechanical, biological, and of course they may involve pesticides as well. And then crucially, something that's often missed on this sort of process wheel is the evaluation periods. What worked last year, what didn't work, how could it improve for the following season? So it's important that iterative process continues. To try to facilitate that, we've developed the IPM assessment plans, and this is really a tool that the main decision makers, typically the farmer and their agronomist, can use to firstly identify what's being done now and discuss why, and then think about what could be done in the future to increase the adoption of IPM on farm. It only takes about 30 minutes to complete, and I think it's really useful, firstly, because it provides sort of a baseline for the farm. They get a score out of 100, which is based on the work we published in Pest Management Science a couple of years ago. So hopefully they can try to take steps to improve their score. It also gives us regional, national score data as well, so we can see how people are performing in the different sectors as well, and also identify what practices have been adopted over others and what issues or topics require further R&D and knowledge exchange activities. I mentioned a scoring system. So this is a summary of the scoring system, which is based on expert opinion of about 50 farmers and agronomists mostly. About half of the score is taken up by preventative measures, but you see there's also significant points awarded for adoption of rotation and the factors considered when planning for IPM, which is a very important process. IPM, as I said, is a holistic approach to pest management. These plans have been running for almost a year now, and we've got over 4,000 responses. This is just the data from the NFU, so it's mostly England. We've also got 400 responses from Scotland as well, which we need to add into the analysis shortly. As you'll see, we've got a good normal distribution, so we feel like we're covering the range in terms of levels of IPM adoption on different farms. You'll notice as well there may be slight differences between the arable and the grassland one in terms of the mean scores and things like that, but that's not to be unexpected because the IPM plans are very different. The grassland one focuses at the moment exclusively on weed control. What you will notice is that we've only had just over a couple of hundred responses to the grassland one. It's not a component of the quality assurance schemes at the moment, so uptake has been slow, and we need something to incentivize them to complete these plans. And it's an area that we recognise we need to engage more with. A lot of grassland farmers consider IPM as very much a horticulture and arable thing. We need to get them involved in the conversation. So looking at the arable plans, we can identify which practices have been adopted over others by looking at differences between those higher adopters, so the upper quartile, and comparing that to the bottom quartile. If you navigate towards the right of the screen, you'll see that those top performers are adopting many more preventative measures to prevent the pest actually entering the farm, but also controlling its movement when it is on farm. They're also considering many more factors when planning for IPM, and they're also typically part of a discussion group as well. So they're keen to exchange information on, based on their own experiences, what practices worked over others, what could be done in the future to remedy a particular crop pest combination issue. We recognise that as being that knowledge being particularly important because it's impossible to adopt a new IPM practice unless you first learned about it. This is just a quick snapshot which kind of proves that. So one of the questions we had in the plan is, how familiar are you with IPM on a 1 to 5 scale, ranging from not to very familiar? As you can see, as we increase familiarity, both in the arable and grassland sector, we are seeing an increase in IPM score. So it holds true that we basically need to be improving the knowledge on IPM amongst the growers and their advisors if we're likely to have any chance of improving uptake across the board. When looking at which information sources lead to higher levels of uptake, we can see here when looking at IPM score on the vertical axis and the range of potential information sources along the horizontal axis, Those who score highly are typically citing information from research organisations that's put out through levy boards and professional memberships as being their top choice in terms of IPM information source. Typically, this work will be current, evidence-based, and most of the time independent as well, which makes sense. The next step down is looking at evaluating what happened in previous seasons and building on that. So it's really sort of past experience. And then there's agronomists and discussion groups are also considered. We're talking about the role of the agronomist. When asked about their relationship with their agronomist, the vast majority of farmers either rely totally on their agronomists and act on their advice. They decide on the strategy together. So this, and actually just less than 1% actually don't use a basis qualified agronomist. So this really highlights the significant role of the agronomist in putting that sort of higher level guidance and advice that will come from research organisations, from levy boards and professional memberships, and making that into an actionable plan to increase IPM uptake on farm. So just to summarise, those high IPM adopters are adopting more preventative measures. They're considering many more factors when planning for IPM, and they're actively seeking current up-to-date evidence-based knowledge. For us, it's important that we make sure that IPM advice is clear, consistent, and evidence-based. And crucially, it's important that we consider IPM adoption a responsibility of all involved. There's a lot of pressure put on farmers to adopt IPM, and unless the whole supply chain is involved in that process to encourage further adoption, it's likely that the farmer will be asked to fit the bill, and we don't think that's fair. So it's important that we engage with the processors, the consumers, the retailers, to ensure that any potential risk associated with change in practice, and there's always risks associated with any change in practice, are potentially shared more throughout the supply chain. We're continually developing these sector-specific IPM plans. So over the coming months, we'll be reviewing the broadacre crop one, the arable one, and the grassland one, and probably adding in an extra element which will involve sort of planning for the future, commitment to change. And we've also got a specialist horticultural one which will be coming out also in the next few weeks. And with that, I'd like to pass over to Chris, who'll be talking about the Test and Trials project.
Thanks, Henry. I'm going to talk about how we've used those VI IPM assessment plans and other tools in a project looking at how IPM could be supported under future schemes that reward environmental land management, like the SFI that we've been talking about previously today. Now, DEFRA has been co-designing these schemes using the Test and Trials programme to work with stakeholders to understand how the new scheme could work. And under that programme, DEFRA invited proposals for test and trial projects that basically contribute to its understanding of one or more of these 6 priority themes. And in response, the NFU applied for and secured DEFRA funding to run what turned out to be the only test and trial investigating how IPM could be supported and incentivised under a future scheme. And specifically our proposal, if you just click through the next 3 clicks, Henry, our proposal set out to assess how farmers and growers could be helped to incorporate IPM effectively into a land management plan, which then enables recording of IPM public goods delivery. It set out how to looking at how to assess the advice and guidance that farmers and growers need to plan, deliver and record IPM public goods in a land management plan. And it set out to provide some insight into a possible basis for payment mechanisms. In addition, we also set out to get a better understanding of what the drivers of behaviour change were to provide insight into how payment incentives could increase delivery of IPM public goods. This project's run for the last year. It was delivered for us by a collaboration between a team at ADAS, led by Neil Pavley, and a team at SRUC, led by Henry. Next slide, please. Now, this figure basically maps out the entire process of the project. Just click. Thanks. And we started by asking farmers and growers to basically opt in to being part of the project when they completed their new VI IPM assessment plan that Henry talked about. And then we used this information to select a representative sample of farmers that we took through to the IPM land management part of the project. So next click. And at this stage, we split our population of farmers into 3 groups to receive 3 different levels of advice and guidance about how to complete an IPM focused land management plan. And the levels were basic support, the group we later called self-completers. They were basically just given written guidance and left to get on with it. And then there were group workshops where crop protection specialists provided guidance. And then there was one-to-one guidance where the participants individually got the support of a crop protection specialist to guide them through the process. The farmers were also selected to represent 3 broad cropping groups based on their dominant crop type, and these were wheat, potato and grassland. And then using Microsoft Excel, a land management plan tool was created for each of the 3 crop types. And this tool included some general questions about IPM practices, crop walking, use of reduced doses, biopesticides, recording of successive interventions and reviewing outcomes. But it then moves on to asking a whole range of specific questions about IPM interventions which we know to be effective at controlling specific weeds, invertebrate pests and pathogens in the specific crops. Now this slide, I don't expect you to see the detail, but it just shows you some of the kind of complexity. This is for invertebrate pests in wheat. I think the important part here is that the farmer is being asked about IPM interventions that we know have a real practical relevance and usefulness for the crop pest situation that they're facing. So these tools, they form the basis of the tool and the guidance within it enables the farmer to be guided immediately towards useful IPM measures. It provides a brief summary about the IPM measure, and it then enables the farmer to record using drop-down boxes whether they already implement that IPM measure or whether they intend to do so in the future, and whether that's in the short term or in the long term. Okay, I'm not going to go into any more detail on this form. We'll just go on to the next slide, I think. So looking now at the land management plan results and the evidence that the project's been able to feed into the different teams developing the future SFI schemes. Key thing to note here is that the land management plans were based on, as I've already said, effective evidence-based and available IPM methods. They were well received by those that completed them, and I think we found that they were simple enough to do that it is conceivable that these could be completed for several different crops. The involvement of advisors and consultants in the process would be a benefit, as participants, they preferred some face-to-face guidance, and they appeared to show a greater change in their thinking when they had some face-to-face interaction. The tool also provides a series of benefits which are outlined here, which I've already talked through. And the completed line management plans did show a commitment to do more IPM beyond current practice. And for arable crops, this ranged from 12 to 38%, and for grassland, this ranged from 2 to 21%. Next slide. So the next stage of the project was conduct in-depth behavioural insight interviews with farmers, and this was trying to assess the impact that the guidance had on farm management practice and attitudinal change, and also to identify what the barriers were and incentives to IPM uptake. Next slide. And the results from this basically showed that there were similar views across the different test and trial groups. The economic and environmental drivers were most often cited for why IPM advice or guidance was used. And while 65% of interviewees, they already considered they had a good understanding of IPM before the project, 25% of the workshop and 17% of the one-to-one participants' views on IPM were changed as a result of their involvement. But interestingly, none of the self-completers they didn't have that face-to-face contact. For none of the self-completers felt that their views on IPM were changed. Key barriers to IPM practices were highlighted as economic, lack of knowledge or understanding of IPM, and mindset or habits. And 76% of interviewees, they cited economic factors as an important enabler or reason to implement more IPM practices on farm, and 50% cited economic factors as the biggest enabler, following by good advertisement of IPM and education. Next slide. So let's just move on to the conclusions and possible next steps for the project. For land management plans, we're going to need to develop more tools for each key crop, because we've just done potatoes, wheat, and grassland. And these tools will need to be focused on IPM methods with good evidence of effectiveness, and there are new reviews done through AHDB that will provide more information around this. Our evidence from this test and trial indicates that the widespread use of an IPM land management plan tool would help farmers to record both current implementation of IPM, but also commitments to implement more further IPM in the future. On advice and guidance, it's clear to us that the guidance and support that is provided in future for users to complete an IPM land management tool, it should include some short written guidance, ideally some online kind of video presentations, but also we found through this project that people would need some technical assistance to resolve IT issues. We think the guidance could also be strengthened by providing interactive virtual workshops. And reiterating what's been mentioned a couple of times, the involvement of crop consultants will be important going forward, and they need to be engaged as a key stakeholder group to support farmers implementing IPM under any future schemes. For payment mechanisms, to obtain value for money, the IPM future schemes support needs to be focused on key crops and key pests. And in defining what those key crops and key pests are, we need to consider the public good aims of IPM and look at where there are real opportunities for greater IPM implementation. Regarding the possible next steps, this could be looking at kind of an extension of this project, if that potential opportunity, implementing IPM under future schemes on contrasting crops in regions with contrasting farming systems. So we really want to test that IPM tool, line management plan tool that we've developed for key pests, key crops, and identify how it could work. Those land management plans could work in conjunction with sustainable farming incentive standards, and also test if the importance of economic incentives are borne out in practice. And lastly, it's been identified through this project that the success of IPM adoption, it can be measured in the longer term using two methods. We've got the DEFRA Pest and Disease Survey that's going to quantify a whole range of things, including around changing farm practice and whether it actually results in changes in IPM practice, changes in pesticide use, populations of beneficials, and effective control of pests and pathogens. And then you've also got the VI IPM assessment plan, which we've shown can provide a single combined metric of IPM adoption across years relative to a published baseline, and indeed relative to the results from this test and trial. Next slide. So thanks for listening. Just like to finish off by acknowledging the funding support of DEFRA for this project, and also thanking colleagues from ADAS, SRUC, the NFU, and indeed the VI for their input to this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Henry, and thank you, Chris, as well. Have we got any questions? I always have a question, so if anybody hasn't, then I will kick off. Chris, where do you see this evolving to within SFI? And are we talking about two plans, or are we talking about one plan emerging out of this? Because there is the IPM plan at the moment. This new one that might appear in SFI, surely this must be combined to have a single plan, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the land management plan, I mean, I showed you just one screenshot of an Excel spreadsheet. So that was just invertebrate pests for wheat. So I think that showed you a level of complexity. And I think that is a level of detail and complexity that goes way and beyond the VI IPM assessment plan tool that we've got at the moment. So I think I can envisage that there are going to be different levels. I try and avoid using the word tiers, but kind of different levels of delivery by farmers on IPM that could then really could potentially receive different levels of support under future schemes. And I guess doing the IPM assessment plan tool, completing that and demonstrating what you're doing through that, and some ambition to do more as the plan develops, will provide a kind of a baseline, could provide a kind of baseline entry level. But then the land management plan tool, which is a lot more complicated, a lot more detailed, a lot more demanding tool, could be an additional level could attract an additional level of support under future schemes. I mean, this is very much talking off the top of my head, but I'm just trying to get across that there is a very marked difference in the level of complexity and involvement in those two different kind of plans and tools.
So could you see? So yeah, no, I think I get that. So I'm always concerned about the human resources department that's available on most farms, and the more granularity and the more detail that's required often takes more time, and it could take people away from actually the food production they're in. But I would agree, the more complicated, perhaps in introductory and intermediate and advanced type area. Henry, just a question to you.
Just to come back on that, Phil, though, we found, I mean, I think it took on average between 1 to 2 hours to complete a land management plan, and that would have been for a whole crop. So for if you were completing that because you were a participant, because wheat was your dominant crop, then that would have been 1 to 2 hours to do it for all of your wheat pests, your wheat diseases, and your wheat weeds. So it's not massively onerous in terms of time. It is demanding, but it's not massively onerous in terms of time. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Henry, just one of the comments that when we've been discussing this with some of our colleagues and at DEFRA is around the existing survey and assessment, and then really developing it into a plan as well. So survey, see where people are, assess where they are, and then develop that further plan. Can you see that in the short term still being a development in the NFU VI IPM plan before we evolve into land management plans on IPM?
Yes, indeed. And actually, the current draft we have of the specialist horticulture IPM plan, which Spencer on the panel has been working a lot on, does have that sort of second section where it's about planning for the future and what sort of changes you're going to implement on farm. So a certain amount of commitment to change. So essentially the new plans will be, we envisions anyway, will be sort of 2 parts. So there'll be the initial sort of assessment plan as it is, plus with this extra, what are you going to do next, basically? And what do you need to make those changes? Because they've got to be financially viable as well.
And that could evolve out into perhaps an update of the arable plan going forward as well.
Indeed, we plan to roll out that sort of structure to the arable and also the grassland one over the next few months.
Excellent, thank you, Henry. I'm not sure whether Edward can speak. Edward, is it possible to get Edward to come on the screen? If not, I'll ask his question because he's just put it in the chat.
It's popped up.
Hello.
Hi, Edward. You're on. You're live.
Okay. The point about agronomists and farmers taking the decision in the plan of the use of insecticides, I think there is quite a lot of pressure on what might happen. I'm thinking BYDV and the assessment of what locally the pressure might be. You might not have a suction trap nearby. The other thing would be the weather conditions, how many day degrees, etc. But at the end of the day, there's no qualification, there's no evidence has to be provided before that pesticide is approved for use. So, with all good intentions, perhaps agronomists are thinking we don't want to use these chemicals, but so we can all sleep at night, perhaps we ought to put the spray on. So I'm thinking, can there be a qualification, photographic or some methodology that has to be adhered to before we lose the diversity of insects, basically?
So I suppose this, Henry and Chris, this is about developing more monitoring and thresholds that would perhaps give us something substantial to measure back on. I'm not sure.
I mean, for me, basically what Edward's talking about is adhering to the principles of IPM. Because actually, if you're adhering fully to the principles of IPM, and the principles I refer to are those that are basically embodied within, the EU regulation, Sustainable Use Directive that we've effectively inherited, then monitoring is a clear requirement, and use of thresholds, if they are available, is a clear requirement. And going forward, you should be able to provide that decision tree that shows you've done all the the kind of the good husbandry stuff, you've done all the preventative stuff that you possibly can in terms of IPM, and we need all those steps recorded. And I think I believe a lot of this stuff will be being done on farm, but one of the challenges we face is that it's just not being recorded. But those steps all need to be recorded, and then the monitoring needs to be recorded. If there's thresholds, if there's use of forecasting models, we need that to be recorded. And then if it comes to pass that an intervention is required, that then you consider the alternatives. Are they available? Are they effective? And if alternatives or lower risk controls aren't available or aren't going to be effective or are prohibitive in terms of cost, then you need to intervene with what you would term as some classic chemistry. Then you've got that full decision tree demonstrating that you've got how you've got to that point. But that is implementing IPM properly from as I see it. So yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. And I'm sure technology and apps and a whole host of companies and software producers will come up with helping us with some of those solutions in the future. I'm conscious of time, so thanks very much indeed. Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Chris, for that. And we look forward to seeing how that evolves in the future. Okay, I'm going to move on now to Dave, safely back from Peterborough to north of the border in Scotland. And Dave, you're going to give us an update on the VI in Scotland.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Good to be here and see you all again. Yeah, just we've had quite a update again, and I'll just run through a few of the highlights. So we took a break for 9 months, and the Scottish VI now meets virtually every 3 months, and we have representatives from the UK VI in attendance as well, and have recruited new members from across the industry, stakeholder members, to have a more diverse group. And the huge benefit of having both Neil and Phil in attendance when they can make it is to make sure we're all on the same topics. We're all speaking from the same one voice for UK where we can, although we will have going forward, I'm sure, differing views with the political devolved agendas. Profile update, as well as having attended meetings, we've got the update on the website as well, the Scottish page on the new VI website that Phil mentioned earlier, which is good. I've been representing VI at multiple events and shows over the past year. With a focus of pushing in this sector, we've recruited a new Scottish VI champion, Alan Grant, who joins us today in the group. He's a grassland farmer from Fraserburgh up in the northeast of Scotland, and this brings the total number of champions to 4 in Scotland, which is good. And we've been actively pushing for grasslands because it's an important, as we've mentioned already, it's an important crop, and an IPM needs to be put over that as well. So pretty pleased to have him join us. going forward with current and future activities, issuing safe disposal guides ahead of the withdrawal of metaldehyde, and training sessions for how to complete the IPM plans. As much as some of us think the work Henry's put together to put these plans together is straightforward, just little coaching sessions or easy guides, and then obviously improving the data collection of the IPM plans, sprayer testing, and numbers using biobeds and biofilters, looking at different ways to encourage the take up of biobeds and biofilters at fill stations, which would be beneficial. And look to be launching and promoting the horticulture IPM plan for Scotland as well, which looking forward to getting that one out. Issuing guidance and best practice on Scottish Water's most commonly detected substances, similar to what Alister was mentioning earlier. We have slightly different active ingredients found in the water courses up here, so just making a more focused direction at tidying them up. Yeah, that's a whistle-stop quick update of what we're doing, but it's all pretty positive and getting good numbers at meetings and encouraging.
Yeah, and Dave, can I give you my thanks for sorting out some of the stuff with AHTB in the last couple of weeks. So it was great to get the VI on a stage in front of agronomists with the messages far and wide. So thank you very much for facilitating that. And yeah, I couldn't agree more about a united approach so that we're all speaking the same messages up and down the country. So thank you very much. Any questions for Dave before I move on to Bruce in Northern Ireland?
Just as some information that may be relevant, Phil, the rest of the group and participants may not be fully aware, but up in Scotland here, we have a coalition, or as good as a coalition, if not in name, in idea cooperation agreement, and we have a green MSP who's in charge of plant protection products, and so with the assumption that the Scottish Government wants to maintain alignment with Europe, could be quite interesting few months going forward, year, which will just be take it as it comes.
Okay, thanks for that update, Dave. Thanks very much. Bruce, are you with us? I see you on the panelist list.
Hi, Phil. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Bruce. I'm not sure whether it's offering you the short straw for me and Neil to come over and see you in the in next year, but the offer is always there. So, Bruce, would you like to give us an update from Northern Ireland?
Yeah, no problem. Good to see everybody again, and yes, thanks for the opportunity to share a few things. Really, from a VI point of view, really, I'm just really coming with a report really on the Water Catchment Partnership and really what we've been doing again throughout the year, and really backing up what Alister has shared with us on his slides earlier there about chemical levels and active ingredient levels in our water quality. It's always an ongoing problem here for us in Northern Ireland. Rebecca from Northern Ireland Water has brought me up to speed just this morning, and again, MCPA continues to be one of our main points of contention here. And really, for suppose from an agronomy point of view, where I can see that being a problem this year is that we have, like the most of you, we've enjoyed very good weather, especially during the latter part of the summer and through the autumn period. We had fantastic harvest conditions here and also planting conditions for the winter crops. But alongside that, the negative side of that is that that allowed wet land that normally would not be sprayed or wouldn't be feasible to be sprayed with, particularly with rust control in mind. Quite a lot of that was actually carried out this year, and I can see where the level of MCPA issues would come from. The other one that has been highlighted to me today is also ammonia in our water, especially again in raw water. But now it is acknowledged by Northern Ireland Water that that is not only an agri issue, it's also very much one from industry. And I think that is acknowledged by everyone involved. We did have it's an aside really, but we did have a very high profile fish kill in one of our local rivers here a few months ago. And of course, initially, the finger was been pointed very strongly at the farming community for bringing that to bear. But it actually has turned out that the active substances involved there were detergents and surfactants. And there was a direct industrial link there. So the farming community were vindicated on that one. The other ingredients which seem to be worrying Northern Ireland water and causing issues, infiltration, are triclopyr, fluroxypyr, and probably surprisingly here, with the limited area of oilseed rape in Northern Ireland, quite a bit of clopyralid as well, probably more than the Leggatt. And one which I thought was surprising was that Macaprop P, CMPP, still seems to be sort of rearing its head on some of the testing results. I think maybe looking to the future too, the one problem we have is obviously funding affects so many of the schemes that we try to bring to bear. And the weed wiper scheme, which has been going now for 5 years, is likely to have to become much more limited in 2022 and beyond, simply from a funding point of view. There is money coming from a Peace Plus fund. It's all part of the Good Friday Agreement and the political situation here in the province here, that this Peace Plus fund is diverting money into many schemes. And so there's likely to be a limited continuation of weed wiping in one or two specific areas, but those that have been enjoying completely free rush control and weed wiping control, not only from the contractor charges, but also even the glyphosate being used, that was completely free for farmers who were prepared to get involved in that scheme. That's likely to be coming to an end in 2022. And the slightly concerning thing about it is those that have already sort of decided to opt out, even towards the end of 21 of this past year, have actually, some of them have gone back to conventional spraying and back to MCPA again. So they haven't been prepared to stick with the weed wiping contractors and pay them to come on farm to help with that. So that's something that's causing us quite a bit of concern here at the moment. So that's really about it, Phil. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Bruce. Perhaps something that could be looked at in SFI going forward about weed wiping just came into my mind. But anyway, a discussion for another day. But thanks very much for that update. Has anybody got any questions for Bruce? And if not, has anybody got any other business? In which case, I'm just looking around the screen here. Jenny, you can't pick up on anything?
I can't see any raised hands.
Okay. Sorry, we've slightly run over, but I think it was important that some conversation with the Minister and also from Henry and Chris. Thank you very much to Dave for the updates from Northern Ireland and Scotland. Thank you very much indeed for the sponsors as well, and for those who have joined the call and in the stakeholder group today. I think if there isn't any other business, can I hope you have a good rest of the day and wish you probably a happy Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year when the National Action Plan will be sometime in the first quarter. Okay. See you soon. Cheerio now.
Thank you, Phil.
Bye.
Bye-bye.